Alexa, stop. It's here. It is positively here. The moment we have spent years and years waiting for. Epic has laid off 1,000 employees because of declining Fortnite sales. You know, kids aren't interested in like the bazillionth Marvel reskin anymore. Okay, they're not excited by battle passes or emotes, and like the fad is over basically, and it's never coming back. The Fortnite thing has completely collapsed, and what we're seeing is the end of the dark age of gaming. The end in which this is the game that dominated the cultural landscape, that people were obsessing over. You know, I knew people who only played more Fortnite. I know people who whose marriages ended because of Fortnite. You know, I know people who would only talk about Fortnite in their personal lives and had nothing else going for them. Like, Fortnite was an absolute bane on our existence. And it was very obvious to me that this had no long-term staying power the way that something like Pokemon or The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has. Like, this game was a complete fad. And now, considering these layoffs, we are beginning to see mainstream audiences come out and acknowledge that Fortnite is on the decline. Once this game is no longer on top of the world, once people aren't obsessively playing it and talking about it, what you're going to see is a massively sharp decline of interest from the community to the point where the game may as well not even exist. It is a meme game that has reached the end of its life expectancy and is just becoming terminal, okay? It's the Harambe of gaming in this sense, where it's a meme that blew up and became iconic and stood the test of time, but at the end of the day, it is still a meme. It has no cultural significance. It's not important in any way. It's not a particularly good game. You know, it was just something that stupid kids played, you know, for a little bit and then moved on with their lives. You know, it is basically 2017's Angry Birds, right? Exact same, like, trajectory, right? Where it had this huge monumental rise to popularity because of, like, you know, iOS and the App Store and just being this game that everyone played. But, like, in actuality, it just wasn't that good or impressive. You know, Fortnite, it got a Switch 2 version. And who do you know who came out and was like, oh, man, I can't wait to play Fortnite on my Switch 2? Like, nobody did that. And the narrative at the time was that, like, well, the Switch 2 just isn't that popular. But what's actually happening is that people are getting bored of Fortnite. They're getting bored of the formula. You know, they've experienced the formula in other better games, and Epic just isn't able to innovate. You know, what was once, like, a huge cultural thing is left in the past as people move on and play better games like Pokemon Pokopia, like Mario Kart World, like Donkey Kong Bonanza. There are just other better alternatives on Nintendo consoles, and it has led to Epic Games firing 1,000 people due to their declining relevancy. And they know it too. They know that there's no coming back from this. And it's very, very interesting to see this happen because I think a lot of people had this mindset that, like, Fortnite would never really go away, that it would be this, like, evergreen thing, that they would be that it would be successful in perpetuity, and it just isn't true. Like, this is something that we really do have to talk about in business, because I do think a lot of people really, really believe it's not true, but the idea that something can be too big to fail is not real, okay? Because we're seeing it happen with Disney, we're seeing it happen with GTA. We're seeing it happen with, like, COD and now Fortnite. You know, Fortnite was supposed to be the video game that drove people away from Nintendo consoles and onto PC. And not only did that not happen, Fortnite itself is a shell of its former self, while Nintendo is bigger than ever. You know, Fortnite, you know, Tim Sweeney desperately tried using Fortnite to catapult the Epic Game Store into relevancy. Didn't work. You know, Epic is just a complete joke. You know, they spent the past 10 years not able to grow their brand outside of Fortnite, and now they're suffering the consequences of that. Now they're struggling to keep the lights on as they fire everybody and try and, like, you know, salvage their declining relevancy. And it is very, very glorious to see, because Fortnite is the kind of fad that isn't really replicatable, okay? You know, they jumped on a trend, they were able to, like, capitalize on it, they were able to, like, milk it to death, but the cow has dropped dead. And, like, nothing that they've tried since has been, like, nearly as lucrative. And as a result of that, they're going to have to massively scale back their plans for the future. They're going to massively scale back, like, their agenda going forward. And we're going to be in this weird scenario. We're going to be in this weird situation where the masses are just going to sit there and desperately try and gaslight you into thinking that the Nintendo, the next big thing is going to kill Nintendo. Okay, that's kind of where we're at now, is that the industry is scrambling to find the next big Nintendo killer. You know, back in the day it was Minecraft, then it was Fortnite, and, like, now they don't really have an alternative. You know, the best they can do is just, like, well, just wait until Grand Theft Auto 6, bro, but, like, there's a very strong possibility that that's going to launch day and date on Switch too. You know, Fortnite is a game that would, if it came out today, it would have launched on Nintendo consoles day and date, okay? Now, honestly, if you think about it, it didn't take that long for Fortnite to come to, like, Nintendo consoles anyway. But, like, we're at the point now where it's very difficult for me to imagine that, like, some upstart studio can come out of nowhere, become popular, become successful, and not have some kind of presence on Nintendo hardware. You know, like, this is the thing that's, like, a lot of people don't understand, is that, like, you know, if you try and shill something like Resident Evil Requiem or, like, Pragmata, like, these games have Nintendo Switch 2 versions. So all you're doing is essentially selling people on the Nintendo Switch 2. Like, it's remarkable how, like, how long the industry has tried to keep up this farce, this idea that PC gaming is this huge monumental thing. But, like, you know, when you look at Fortnite, when you look at its rapid descent into irrelevancy, when you look at, like, what Epic's doing, when you look at, like, how little they've expanded, when you see what Nintendo is doing, like, the difference in quality is clear. Like, Fortnite is one of the worst things to happen to video games in a lot of sense. Because kids, instead of going outside and discovering, like, great new video games that their friends are playing, just sat around and just played the same thing for basically their entire childhoods. You know, where we grew up, you know, we were getting, like, crazy new games all the time from Nintendo. You know, from Mario 64 to Star Fox 64 to Ocarina of Time to GoldenEye to, like, you know, Pokemon's, you know, came out 30 years ago. You know, we had it good. And then these kids were just told that, like, oh, we have Fortnite and that's it. You know, like, being a kid must suck today. And it is our responsibility to stop these kids from falling into these traps again, okay? If you want to have a good, fulfilling life, you have to stop playing Fortnite. Fortnite is absolutely one of the worst things to happen to gaming, and I am very, very glad to see this game rapidly decline in relevancy.